Well, you may have heard by now that we are moving to California for the upcoming year. And I feel the same way. Over the last few weeks that we've been gone, we've been in Los Angeles, where Sheila is now enrolled as a patient in this well-known City of Hope, which is a cancer center, large cancer center, with some of the best specialists, doctors in the country. And they find her case very interesting, and they're really looking for what might be the best solution for the coming weeks, months, maybe years for her. And it's also where her 2 children live and 2 grandchildren. So we have a lot of support there, and we just so appreciate your prayers and the support that you've given us over the last years together. You know, it's been exactly 7 years ago this month that you extended that invitation to be your pastor, and I accepted. And we've been through a lot together. So it is tough to say goodbye. We do a lot of goodbyes in our lives. And this one's hard because we don't want to leave Vero Beach, our home, but especially you, who we've grown to love. But sometimes there are things in our lives that we don't plan for. And getting the best doctors to help Sheila with her recurrence of breast cancer is one of those things. So we make plans and then we hold them loosely. Our plan is to be back in Vero Beach a year from now, but I certainly am encouraging the leadership of our church to appoint a search committee for your next pastor, because I don't really know what the future will hold for us. We are renting a little house in Simi Valley, just outside of Los Angeles, and we're renting our home here as well. Not quite yet, we're in the process, so you could pray for that. But Sheila's house is such that we need to take the action now rather than in a few weeks. You know, if we knew ahead of time what any of us were facing, we could plan a whole lot better. So when we come to these crossroads, we do need to prioritize and ask, well, you know, at this point, what's most important to us? Not necessarily what makes the most sense financially or what we feel like doing, but what is most important in this season of our lives, because we only get one shot at this, you know. There are no dress rehearsals. This life we're living is the only one we get. So for us, this new diagnosis became actually a great opportunity. Otherwise, you just sort of day in, day out, do what you're used to doing and do it as comfortably as you can with aging bodies. But it provided a great opportunity to stop and say, all right, what are our priorities? What do we care about the most? And how should that priority help determine the decisions that we're making today and tomorrow? So ever since we decided a couple of weeks ago that we were going to make this move, I began wondering, well, what would be an appropriate challenge to leave you with? And for me, one of the hard lessons of growing older is that we need to keep thinking, what's next? What's next? Because as our bodies and our minds begin slowing down. And just in the brief conversations I had with a half dozen of you, that was high on the list. Things that are falling apart and minds that are slowing down. And I don't know about you, but I want to finish well in this world. And I want to go out knowing that I did my best to be like Jesus, right to the end. So with that in mind, look at your bulletins, and I'll read the scripture for the morning. James 1, verse 9. Believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position. But the rich, now remember, wherever you see that word, it doesn't get you off the hook. You think, wow, the rich, one percenters, people with all that money. If you came in a car to church this morning and you have a home, a place to go to, and you have food to eat, you're in the top 5% of wealth in the world. Top 5%. So we would be considered the rich. The rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wildflower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossoms fall and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away even while they go about their business. I had a friend, good friend, Tom, who had a home in Massachusetts and a little summer place up in New Hampshire. And Tom, from the time I first met him years ago, wanted to succeed in business so that he could retire early to the lakes and the mountains in New Hampshire, which is where I first met him. He worked long days in his job in Massachusetts. He joined civic clubs, and when he was in New Hampshire, he joined our church. But his main interest was work. And his occupation really became his preoccupation in life. And his wife tried to slow him down and remind him of family responsibilities and kids who needed him. On the other hand, they all kind of liked the comfortable lifestyle that his hard work provided. Meanwhile, the warning lights were going off, and his marriage was growing cold due to the lack of attention. But I kept hearing him say, as soon as things settle down, as soon as I can get this next acquisition, anyway, I'm doing this for my family. So one day, he was in a hurry out the door, and he felt some pressure in his chest and some numbness in his left arm. And his wife drove him to the emergency room, where they told him that he had had a heart attack and he needed to make some changes. So for a while he did. He got into an exercise program, didn't eat as much red meat and chocolate cake. But as his symptoms disappeared, so did his motivation to stay disciplined. Tom made it to an early retirement. His company told him he had done a great job, and they gave him this wonderful retirement package. And he and his wife, their 3 children were now married, moved to their summer home in New Hampshire. But Tom didn't shift gears into retirement well. Still got up at 6 in the morning. I know some of you can relate to this, and went to work building out their summer home in New Hampshire. Landscaping, stone walls, project after project. When his wife asked if he would go with her to visit the grandkids, he said, "You go this time. As soon as, I get this project done, things are going to settle down. Then I'll go with you." Tom, I remember, he bought one toy after another. He had a trailer to haul his stuff in, and a pickup truck to pull it with. And then he bought this small bulldozer. And he just had the best time. He was moving stone around and pushing dirt around. But of course, he had to build a bigger garage. But life was good. And each evening, he would come in and have dinner and flop in his favorite recliner and think about all his stuff and what he had accomplished and what he would be doing the next day. And then he'd fall asleep watching TV. And one evening, as his wife headed upstairs to bed, she said, "Are you coming?" And he said, "In a minute." And at 3 a.m., his wife woke up and realized her husband hadn't come to bed, and she went down and found him in his recliner. Skin was cold. She dialed 911. They came, they tried to resuscitate him, but it was too late. And his death was a shock. Shock to the family, it's a shock to the community, it's a shock to the church. He had been involved in many really good things in town. And there was a service for him. People crowded into this church and spoke kind words. We all went to the cemetery and gathered around the coffin and hugged and cried and then went home. Tom was one of my first funerals as a pastor in New Hampshire. He was 66. And I remember he used to say to me, "You know, Dave, what is this all about, really?" And, you know, I think of James' words, the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wildflower. The wildflower is a common sight in the Middle East. Spring rains fall for a time, and then those Sirocco hot winds come. And just in a matter of hours, the hillside full of these beautiful wildflowers look like this. And James is saying, I want you to look at the flower, and I want you to think about life and death. One day you're full of life and energy and beauty, and 2 days later, people are streaming by your coffin saying, I just talked to him yesterday. Death is universal, right? The death rate hovers right around 100%. And death can be sudden. Here today, gone tomorrow. I was glad to see that you're offering another end-of-life seminar. I don't know what that donkey's about, but whoever put that in there. It's called The End. But it's a seminar that's coming up the end of the month. And what's so good about that is we need those reminders so that we can plan well for that day. Jesus tells a parable about this. In Luke chapter 12, Jesus tells those who are gathered around him this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. So this is a farmer who's doing well. So he has food to eat and house over his head, horse to ride on or whatever. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I'll store all my grain and my goods, and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy. Move to Vero. Eat, drink, be merry. But God said to him, you fool, This very night, your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? And I don't believe that God kills people. I don't think God got angry at this guy and took his life. I think God just knows when we're going to die, right? And he wants to keep reminding us, you are going to die. And for some of us, he can see that clock ticking down. And he wants to remind us, as that clock keeps ticking, what are your priorities? What are you doing? I know you're 80-something, 90-something. What are you doing with your life? What are your priorities? So he tells this parable. This is how it will be, Jesus says, with anyone who stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. And I read those verses, and I think of the game Monopoly. It's a game where the whole point is to collect as much stuff as you can, right? So we buy property. We buy maybe Marvin Gardens and even Park Place and Boardwalk, and then we make a couple of deals and we put hotels up and we collect the rent, and if we're lucky enough with a little skill thrown in, we win. What happens after we win? Well, everybody's mad at us, and then we sort of laugh it off, and then what? We put all the $500 bills in the neat stack back in the box. Hotels, back in the box. Property cards, back in the box. Game over. That's life. We run and work and play and do and collect and save and protect and invest, and then game over. It all goes back in the box. So a reasonable question to ask is, what can I do that will last? What should I do today? And once we figure that out, then now is the time to do it, because life never really settles down. So we have to prioritize what's important. Do that now, not later. Not someday when this happens or after that happens, but now. And most of us have less time in this world than we think. My first funeral as a young pastor right out of seminary was when two high school seniors who had just graduated, a guy and a girl, their whole life in front of them, smart kids, crossed over the center line in their car, and in an instant, it all went back in the box. In Jesus' parable, 12 times we read these words. I, me, myself, my grain, mine. Nowhere in the parable does he ask God, what do you want me to do with my wealth? Or I wonder who needs what I've been blessed with in such abundance. He doesn't thank God for providing it. I mean, he's a farmer, so he doesn't thank God for the sun and the rain and the soil that produced all those great crops. He sees his riches as a result of his ingenuity, his hard work. And then comes those two words, but God. Game over. Because God understands what's next. We don't. He does. Jesus doesn't criticize those who have a lot. Rather, he comes down on those who are selfish with whatever they've got, who want to hang on to all that they have. So one of the things Jesus is teaching us is give generously and think terminally. We may not think about it much, but when we do, we all understand that we all die. It all goes back in the box. Our body will go in a box, a big one or a little one, and then we'll be put in the ground or we'll be thrown to the four winds. And all that we've worked for and worked hard to achieve in life, and all of our stuff that we've accumulated, will be passed on to others, poor children. We want to think this is just going to go on and on. But we really aren't taking any of that with us. And all of the things we cared so deeply about and worried so much about. Listen to what Jesus says next. Right after this parable, he says, Jesus then turned to his disciples, and he says, I tell you, do not worry about your life. Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to their life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom, God's kingdom. Sell your possessions, give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's not easy to get to that place, is it? Where we stop worrying about us, about our bodies and what's next, and about our money and how's all this going to work, our wants, our desires, and start caring more about the people around us, some of whom really need us. And so Jesus tells story after story, challenging us to give generously, think terminally, and hold everything loosely. It's a good way to think of life. Hands up, hands open. It's either that or that. James writes, everything and everyone will fade. So invest now. Are we invested in what will last? Have we gotten to that place where we're asking, who in my town, who in my church, who in my neighborhood needs my help? And if I'm not physically able to help, what can I do? What can I give to my church that will help those people? Thank you, God. Thank you for the many ways you have blessed us. We do have so much in a world that really has so little. And we all struggle with this topic. How to do a good job with what you've entrusted to us. Lord, would you help us to prioritize our life so that we can give of ourselves and hold what we have loosely. Help us to trust you. And this morning, God, I want to thank you for this church, for this place where we care for each other and spur each other on to share our faith. Thank you. It's in your name, Jesus, that we bow before you right now. Amen.